You are listening to the Marc Guzman Podcast Experience. Before we get started, just a reminder that you can find all of my available rental properties on my website at marcguzman.com. If you own investment property, click on the Owner Services section to see our complete list of services. The Bay Area real estate market is always changing in some way or another. The latest change could come in the form of rent control, and the future of the Costa Hawkins Act could rest in voters' hands this November. If it is repealed, it could have major implications here in the Bay Area and throughout California. Our guests today are Rachael of Golden Gate Sothebys and Kerri Naslund-Monday of Keller Williams. They're here to talk about how the Costa Hawkins Repeal Act could impact the housing situation in the Bay Area. We also focus on single home buyers and look back at some of the people who helped shape our guest's career. Cool. Kerri, Rachael, thank you for being on the podcast again. Second time for each of you.
Happy to be here.
Me too.
So we have a lot to talk about on this podcast, and it's now called Highest and Best. It's no longer called Real Realtors, and we rebranded. This is episode 106 of the podcast. So excited to have both of you here. And so what's new with both of you? And actually, let's start with Rachael, because I know it's been a very busy year with you now being president-elect and getting ready to be president of our association next year.
Yeah, so there's a lot of traveling involved when you're president-elect. They want you to go to the elected officials luncheons and the city luncheons, as well as the CAR directorship for the state level, plus you go to the NAR meetings. So yes, it's been very busy, and then I've decided to put a new tool in my tool belt, and I'm now selling businesses as well, small to medium-sized businesses, nothing like a large Google or anything. But so it's become very busy. I feel like I'm running all the time, but I love it. So
as long as you love it, right?
I do.
That's why we do this. Yeah. Kerri, what's new with you?
Oh, just killing it as usual.
Killing it.
Yeah, my business so far this year is doubling. Last year, I'm currently in process of hiring another agent for my team, and we're just growing. And in addition to that, I continue to train and certify agents to do the online bidding. I think since I was last here, I've certified another maybe 300 agents in the immediate area.
Wow.
To be running the online bidding.
So that online bidding is still growing.
Absolutely. You'll be seeing more and more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. When Kerri was on the podcast last time, we were talking about the online bidding and how that was very popular during the foreclosure days.
Right.
And I didn't know many people were still using it today, but you're using it very successfully.
With traditional sales. Yeah.
Typically in the Oakland-Berkeley area, or?
It's actually starting to take over other areas as well. Some of the agents that I've trained have been in Menlo Park and Fremont. So we'll be seeing it a lot more in a lot more places.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You know what? And I meant to reach out to you last time too, because I wanted to do a test trial for like rental properties to see how that would work.
And I did go back and talk to the developers, and they said that they have had agents use it successfully for renters. And I think the deal is that they have to submit their application first. You have to then approve them to bid based off of the application, and then the highest one wins.
Yeah.
So at the end, that whoever won is already, they all already qualify to be a great tenant in whatever property you're placing them.
Yeah. Oh. That'd be very interesting. Yeah, I wanted to do a test trial. I was just busy and just completely forgot. And so I'll talk to you for sure after the podcast about that.
Absolutely.
So the big talk right now in real estate is Costa Hawkins battle. So just a recap for the viewers and listeners. Basically, Costa Hawkins, what it does is it exempts single-family homes, any new construction after 1995 from being under rent control if a city passes rent control jurisdictions. It also allows for vacancy decontrol. So when a tenant leaves the property, you're then able as a landlord to then put it up to market. Well, with all the tenant groups right now really pushing rent control in various cities, we now have at the statewide level Costa Hawkins battle, where they're now asking, and I believe they have all the signatures, but it's not official yet, you said?
That's what I understand. They're still validating the signatures to get it onto the ballot.
Okay. But they claim they have enough
Plenty.
signatures, yeah.
So
It's likely going to be on the ballot for November of this year. And if it passes, then Costa Hawkins gets repealed. And right before we went live, we were just, we'll have to kind of redo the conversation and recap it here. So from your perspective, is it good? Is it bad? What do you think about it?
Personally, rent control is, it depends on who your audience is. But rent control is bad for the people who are pushing for it. They're doing it because there's a need for low cost housing, but the result of rent control, which has been measured in cities throughout the world, the result is actually the opposite when it comes to rent control as we know it. Not with the vacancy deal, that's a whole different story, but rent control in general suppresses values. It creates a huge disconnect between landlord and tenant. It's an us against them type mentality. It creates situations where landlords aren't gaining the revenues needed to upkeep their properties, and so then properties go into disrepair. Tenants are now taking on those disrepairs because, hey, they've got great rent and they don't want to rock the boat on that. And so then properties sit and start to become blighted because of it. And then that reduces values of all the surrounding properties based off of that. And, you know, if most properties that are sold are based on the income that they can generate when we're talking about rentals. And if that is suppressed, then that is going to be a trickle down into everybody, even homeowners, because if the house next door just got sold with a artificially suppressed low-paying tenant's rent qualifying that property, then that low price point then affects their own personal value and, you know, creates a whole bunch of problems in other ways too. The cities are not going to gain as much revenue off the sale of that house with transfer taxes at the baseline, but also just property taxes, because that property then is, you know, it's marked at a much lower price point than it would have otherwise sold had there not been a tenant in there holding a low rate of rent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with what she's saying. I think that it's just a bad idea. I know that there's some other opinions out there, and you were expressing what some of those were. In our prior conversation,
Yeah.
you should probably recap that.
Yeah, I'll touch on that. So I know that rent control, when it passes, it really sucks for a lot of the current owners of the property, especially what happened in Richmond, where not only did rent control pass and you can raise future rents, but you had to roll back rents to 2015 levels.
Right.
So now they just automatically reduce the entire value of all the properties and what they're actually generating. So what happens is when they go to sell the property on the market, like what you said, buyers, investors are buying based on what the property is currently generating. Now, sophisticated investors love buying in rent control cities because they will come in, buy the property, and their goal is to get 1, 2, or 3 vacancies in a building because there's a lot of upside. And when you start analyzing buildings and start calculating what the equity potential can be once you have a unit vacant, or once you start moving various tenants from one unit to another because you're remodeling, upgrading the building, all of a sudden you have the potential to increase the equity by hundreds of thousands of dollars, even millions, depending on how big the building is. So sophisticated investors love rent control and buy in these cities. But the problem is they have no issue coming in and buying out tenants And it's very hard as a tenant to refuse $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 to $100,000 in San Francisco.
Right.
Very hard to refuse those figures because that might be as much as 1 year's salary or double, right? And so if you're taking the money and leaving, then you have vacancy decontrol through the Costa Hawkins, and rents are now back at market. And because rent control suppresses the housing supply, simple supply and demand, you have, and that's why you see Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco with the highest rents in the Bay Area.
Right. Exactly what I was saying. It causes the opposite effect for the people that are pushing for it. The people that are pushing for it are looking for more answers to our housing issue, and having nowhere for low income workers in the area to be able to live. But if because of that, landlords are faced to constantly be looking for that high end, there will never ever be that low end if it's not artificially placed there. And the result of that is an extreme gap between all of the housing stock as far as rentals go. It's either super, super pricey or super, super low, but nothing in between, and that's a problem.
Yeah, I think when Rachel, when you and I were in San Diego for the Realtor conference,
right,
back in October, I think.
October, yes.
There was an attorney group that was at, I want to say it was investment housing, and they did various studies, but the biggest thing that they took away from older studies that they did is that if every single family home, if 25% of every single family home was allowed to build an additional
accessory unit,
only 25%, all of a sudden our housing crisis eliminated.
Exactly. And those are the places that all of those folks that are putting energy into enforcing stricter rent control laws, and, getting rid of Costa Hawkins and all of that, they're putting their energy in the wrong place. The energy needs to be in the
more housing.
The
zoning changes so that we can get the accessory units.
And be able to, change multiple units into condos, and just to make things a lot more easier to do, so then the housing stock loosens up.
Yeah, and I think, Sam, you pulled up an article, and I don't know if it was from East Bay Express or East Bay Times, but Times, where they mentioned that they did a survey and a poll of people in the Bay Area, or maybe people in California, and they asked, who are you blaming for the housing crisis? And it was interesting that 27% blamed developers.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But they're giving us
developers want to develop.
Supply.
Like it's money for them.
And it gets suppressed by the neighbors.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Especially Central Contra Costa County, where the neighbors just get up in arms when they want to build something. They're, well, what about our green mountains? That
not in my backyard.
Yes, basically.
There's a lady, I don't know her name, but she started a different movement in my backyard. And so she's really pushing for, hey, we need to start building up. We need to start building additional units on properties, because ultimately that's where it comes down to. Right? If you have too much demand, either you move out or you
increase
move
supply.
Up. Yeah.
Exactly.
And the reality is we have so much open space around here. We are not out of land at all, and it can be done. It's just a matter of the right developer coming in and knowing how to work with each city and county to get it done.
Yeah. So with the Costa Hawkins, right now, single families and condos, townhomes are exempt from rent control. If this statewide initiative rejects and repeals Costa Hawkins, cities like Richmond, Berkeley, San Francisco, and Oakland can then initiate rent control on those properties. In your opinion, I mean, how is this going to affect most property owners?
Gosh, I think we will probably see some of those properties coming on the market and being sold because they don't want to deal with that. somebody that owns a single family home, they don't have the luxury of moving their tenants to another unit. They own one single family home, and they can't do anything about the rent that they're getting. So, I think they'd probably just put it up for sale. Mm-hmm. Which actually might loosen up the inventory, but
it might loosen it up temporarily.
Right.
But then once tenants get in there, you won't be able to remove them because of tenants' rights, and so then that housing stock will be nailed down and will be eliminating more potentially available properties, because people who would have normally moved are going to stay put. An example would be a couple or a partnership. One of them's living in a 1-bedroom condo in San Francisco, and then another, they hook up, they decide they're going to get married. They live together in the 1-bedroom condo until they get pregnant. Mm-hmm. Then they move to a 2 or a 3-bedroom house. Kid grows up. At that point, they don't need that much space, and they could probably end up going back to the 1-bedroom, but they don't, because at that time, their 3-bedroom that they've been renting for the last 15, 20 years is less expensive than the 1-bedroom. So now they're going to hold down that 3-bedroom that could have been released for other potential families, because they can't afford the 1-bedroom to downsize into. And so they stay forever. Mm-hmm. They stay till they get carried out.
And let's not forget about the unscrupulous owners that do things to the property to force the tenant to move. The Mission District is probably a great example of that. And the issues that have gone on down there where they forced people out that were under rent control, not really legally.
Yeah. I think in that situation they tried to use the Ellis Act in order to get him out, and I guess they used it incorrectly because their goal.
Fire.
Was it? So am I thinking of a different case?
No. Go ahead.
Okay.
I was being.
Yeah. And so there's specific rules, and a judge just ruled on the Ellis Act yesterday because they came in. There was a court case, and the local courts decided that San Francisco ordinance was legal, and this came into play that they have an ordinance where if you are getting out of the rental market, you cannot put it back on the market for 10 years. Mm-hmm. Well, the appeals court came in and just said, no, that's unconstitutional. A landlord has a right under the Ellis Act to do what they wish as long as they comply with the Ellis Act. So it was a small little victory for landlords, but yeah, you're starting to see this battle, and I think you're going to see it a lot more in the courts as to what is a landlord legally allowed to do with their own property, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting what the two of you were just talking about. I had a very similar conversation with a person. They contacted me. They lived in the Bay Area. Last year, they bought a house up in Sacramento, and now they're like, you know what, this is too much of a commute. We want to move back. We're thinking about just renting the place up there, and we're going to move back here. Well, I'm now having the conversation of saying, oh, okay, well, your property lies in the city of Sacramento. Right. City of Sacramento just filed the paperwork to get rent control on the ballot for November 2018. Right now, your property is a single family, is exempt from that, but if it passes, you would have just cause on that, right? Mm-hmm. However, Costa Hawkins is now going to be on the November ballot.
Right.
If both pass, the city would then have the right to place rent control on your Sacramento unit, and then you have just cause plus rent control. Just keep in mind, if you decide to rent out your Sacramento property, these are potential issues you're going to have to deal with, and we're not going to know until November comes. Mm-hmm. And sometimes even, it takes, by the time they get their rent board rolling and really decide on what they're going to do with single-family homes, we may not know for another year or two, right?
Right.
So now they're thinking, okay, well, we may just stay up there and stay in their house and suffer the commute to San Francisco, or they might just sell it and then just make the move down here.
Right.
Neither of which are adding more rental stock.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Correct.
Which is the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah, because they called me because they were interested in renting.
Right.
And as soon as I told them, okay, well, here's what you have to keep in mind for the future.
Right.
And now they're second guessing it and they're thinking of selling.
Exactly. So all the folks who are pushing for rent control in order to, hopefully create a better situation for especially the more low-income renters are creating more of a problem, because that house, in your example, would have become a rental in the area, increasing supply, and now that's coming off the table because of what's being proposed. Mm-hmm. It's counterintuitive, but in the end, it's hurting the people who need it the most.
So let's talk about single family home buyers. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's a very tough market, even to buy a house. So yeah, we know it's a tough market to rent. It's also a very tough market to buy. Me being a property manager, I see a lot of people coming to apply for my rentals that have loan pre-approvals because they've been looking, they've been offering, they've been outbid, and they say, you know what, we're going to rent for a year, kind of wait and test the market and see if we can get into something eventually. So from your own personal experience in dealing with buyers, what are you seeing on your end as far as how difficult it is? Because there was a reporter that's I think out of Berkeley that came out and showed some statistics that the average closing has about a 35 to 40% down payment. Mm. So do you see that on your end as far as buyers, and how difficult is it?
I have a cash buyer right now who was ready to pull the trigger and was just getting outbid. And, it's an education process. You have to, as they're bidding, you have to educate them that no, in the area you're looking, it's going to be way more than that that it sells for. And she finally had to go and rent something because she needed somewhere to be, and she felt really high pressure. So now she's just kind of sat back. Cash buyer. So all cash. And so now she has a 6 to 9 month lease, I believe it is, and she's just going to sit there until she gets pressured again, pretty much. Mm-hmm. So, it's catch-22, and people just can't find places to live, and then people are afraid to sell, even if they want to upgrade or to downsize. Either way, they're afraid to pull the trigger on buying on selling, because they don't know what they're going to buy. Mm-hmm. Right, and so they're sitting still,
terrified of being homeless.
Yeah.
For that reason, I actually took one of my personal rentals and changed it into an Airbnb of sorts for my clients who are afraid of that interim.
So they can have
So they can have that 3 to 4 months of a landing pad that's fully furnished. They know where they're going. Right. Because that's the biggest pushback from sellers, is they are terrified of being a buyer in this market. Mm-hmm. And I don't blame them. Like you said, Marc, there is actually a ton of cash, and people are coming in, like your client, but also coming in with, you said 30 to 40% down
payment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the reason why they're coming in with those down payments is because they're borrowing and stealing in order, maybe not stealing, but in order to compete with the cash buyers that are out there. And so on paper, they come in on cash, they sit in their house for 6 months, and then they cash out, refi, pay everyone back. So they're borrowing from parents, they're cashing out their retirement accounts temporarily. They're doing whatever they can in order to come in with the heavier down payments, because they're trying to do whatever they can to stand out in the stack. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so it's a crazy time here.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's not going to get any better. Again, back to the housing crisis. I heard a statistic, we have 60,000 more people moving into the Bay Area than are leaving on an annual basis. And so as far as new construction goes, how many new units are being added to right now in the last couple of years to the housing stock? 20,000. That's a 40,000 shortfall of necessity of places to live. Mm-hmm. People who are pulling out of the market and saying, I'm going to hang out and see how this shakes out, they're going to be really sad in a year from now, because it's not shaking out to anything different. And that's just simply because of the economy. We're in the gold corridor. Anything that's commutable to
the city,
San Francisco, or anything tech-based, we are sitting on gold here because they're bringing more people in. Trump's tax reform is allowing the corporations to bring their money back into the country at a very, very low tax rate. And so what do we have right here in the Silicon Valley? A lot of companies that have been keeping their money overseas. Yep. They're starting to bring that back, and they're putting it back into their campuses. They're creating more jobs. More job creation. Hooray, Trump did something, right? More job creation is going to equal more demand on housing, right, and an even larger housing crisis than we're looking at right now. It's not changing, you guys. There's nothing that's going to happen. There's minus the big one.
You don't think interest rates going up are going to affect it?
I think it'll affect a little bit, but not a ton. Tax portability initiative might help.
Yeah. So. Well, they're estimating that to release probably 44,000 more transactions per year,
which is not a ton.
Yeah, it's a very small percentage of all of California, but I think at this point anything helps, and every little bit you can get, go for it, right?
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, being a homeowner of any kind, even if you're taxed higher on it, I mean, you're gaining appreciation. You have that magical third party in your family making money for you, over time, the forced savings account. And so it's just kind of a no-brainer if you can get in, and that's the rub.
I like how you brought up how people are borrowing money from family, because that's exactly what happened to me in one of the cases where I had a buyer looking in a specific neighborhood of Oakland, right? And every house was being listed between $600,000 and $700,000, but we're making offers $850 to $900.
Yep.
We're getting outbid because there's like 40 offers on the property. Mm-hmm. And on one of the properties, I looked to see who ended up buying it, how they bought it, and they bought it for like $990. They bought it cash, but they did a hard money loan, but it came from it had the exact same name, LLC. So it was a relative that basically a father or something gave them the money, and then about maybe 2 or 3 months later they refinanced, and then you saw that paid off.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd like to see a new trend of transparent pricing in those areas. That would be.
It's not going to happen.
I know, but it would be a miracle.
Yeah, it'd be nice, and it's funny. Like people will think that kind of pricing works across the board in every other city, right?
Right, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
You come to Danville and you pretty much pay just a little bit over, or let it sit there for a little bit, and you might even get it under.
Right, but then we're using the same strategy with the online bidding and pricing 30% below market, even in Danville, actually, especially in Danville, where that market's not used to it. So then everybody and their mom literally gets in the car, runs up the street to the showings to try and find out how they can have a piece of Danville at such a discount. And then the bidding, transparent bidding, actually brings it right back up to market value, if not above. I think that's more of an answer than transparent pricing, because transparent pricing, it's been left in the dust in this area. Mm-hmm. So I think that the next logical step in that would be having some sort of transparent bidding.
No, there's been a lot of agents. I remember one agent who did a lot of business here in the West Contra Costa area. He ended up, I think, moving his business more toward Oakland, and then he ended up kind of getting out of real estate and starting a tech company that basically had transparent offerings, right?
Right.
So you could see what it's a bidding auction platform.
Sure.
I don't think his really caught on and really went anywhere.
Yeah.
But people have tried that before. Is there a reason why that's not catching on more?
I see the opposite. And I think that some of the other companies that have tried to do it put too much onto it. They start bringing the terms into it. And so they can bid with their terms being transparent as well. And we don't do that, and the reason for that is that
So you guys are pricing only then?
Price only.
Okay.
And then we go into negotiations like real agents over terms and see how it shakes out. And just because the highest bidder is the highest bidder doesn't mean that they actually
Have the best terms.
Yeah, and the seller has the right to accept, reject, or counter for any reason. So we can go to bidder number 2, which is only $1,000 difference, and see what their terms are and if they have stronger terms. So it's just like regular real estate, except for the money part is being put on the table for everyone to see, which the eBay effect takes over, and it becomes more than what the property's worth. It becomes more about having to win. Human nature. They like to win.
Yeah.
Those weird people.
So let's talk about mentors. And I think everyone who's in business at some point has a mentor. But who was your mentor when you first started out in real estate?
Oh, man, are you ready for a wild story?
Sure.
So his name is Kale, in a way. He no longer practices real estate in the Bay Area. He was actually driven out of the Bay Area because of the wild story. But he really taught me to look to the gray area when it comes to real estate, and still play by the rules, but know that there's also a lot of caveats. Just because someone says it's this way, it may not necessarily be the end all be all. There might be some, situations that you can get around things a little bit. So I feel like that those type lessons taught me a lot in how to run my business and be strategic with my business, and not necessarily feel like I have to do it the same way that everyone else does it because that's the way it's done. It's not. That's not how you have to do it. You can create your business the way that you want to run it. You can have successes based off of doing things that other people aren't necessarily into doing or think are not right. But as long as you're not breaking any laws, making anyone, liable, including yourself, then I don't see why, of course, keep ethics in the whole situation, because that's what what we've all committed to as real estate agents. But there's not just one simple way of doing things because that's the way we've done it, as long as people aren't getting hurt because of it. So the wild ride story is I got into the business right at the crash. And so at the tail end of the good, he had a development deal, a warehouse in Oakland that he was converting into lofts. I think there were 8 lofts. So he got a bunch of people at the office to contribute. We all invested. And then the market tanked. And not the hard money lender, the construction loan, they cut all their funds. They would not release the next level of money for him to continue the project. He saw the values starting to drop, and he knew he had to finish this right away or he's going to lose his money and everyone else's money. So what he did, oh man, what he did is he owned about 7 or 8 income properties in and around the Bay Area. He turned 6 of them into marijuana grow houses in order to fund
Oh my God.
finishing out the deal. Well, one of the houses got broken into by some kids in the neighborhood, and that spurred a 911 call, and there's kids running around the neighborhood with pot plants. And
Oh my gosh.
so that bust created a situation where the city looked into his ownership of the other properties and then went and busted the other
Wow.
properties. So he had a brand new baby, I want to say 3 months old. So he put his wife and his baby on a plane to his parents' house in Maine, and he went straight to his lawyer and he said, okay, how are we going to deal with this? So she advised him not to bail, hang out. And that, I guess, the trigger to the police being able to explore the other properties were all based off of this 911 call. And so the attorney followed This is a good story. The attorney followed I guess 911 calls only get kept for 90 days and then they get erased if they are not subpoenaed.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
I don't quote me on the amount of days, but there's a certain amount of days, and I think it's 90. So the attorney followed to see if that 911 call got subpoenaed, and based off of that, they didn't ever subpoena it, so then they had no right of entry to prove to.
Interesting.
In order to.
They had no
it's
cause
Oakland.
at that point.
It's Oakland. Yeah. They didn't even, those guys don't care. As long as there's like no huge criminal activity going on, everyone grows weed in their eyes. They want to go after the people that are shooting people because of it. So because of that, he got off of everything, but he ended up moving to Maine because it was like egg in his face. He lost everyone's money and he just couldn't. He couldn't continue here. So I think he's selling solar now.
And he's your mentor?
He was my mentor. But, the moral of that story is most people would have seen the crash and the bank saying, we're not giving you any more money. And they would have been like, whoops, sorry, guys. Yeah. Instead, he tried. He looked to the gray area, which if it was 2018 would have been completely legal. But he looked to the gray area in order to try and keep that project going. And so that part happened to be illegal at the time. But that's his type of thinking, is like not, okay, game over, more, okay, what are we going to do now with what we're faced with? How can we create a solution? So those were the lessons that I learned from him in real estate at a more legal level. Is just because someone tells you no doesn't mean that the game's over. It just might mean you need to present it in a different way.
There's a good book that discusses that called Blue Ocean Strategy, and the book goes into talking about really just having a mindset similar to that, where you're constantly looking for that blue ocean where it's wide open, where no one's jumping. Like, instead of trying to make your business better than the next person by doing the exact same thing,
right?
Or like, instead of trying to bring down everyone else's building,
yeah,
go find a piece of land and build your own building, right?
Yep.
And then make people come to you. So very similar strategy. They just called it Blue Ocean Strategy. Right. But same thing. You're always looking for that space where you can innovate, where you could be different, where you can create something new, create your own niche, and allow you to build your own industry, as opposed to, chasing an industry where you can only get a small piece of the pie, especially if the pie never grows, right? Yeah. Rachel, do you have any mentors?
Well, after that story, what can I say? I, too, got in the business at the crash. In fact, it was just as the crash happened. I had decided to go back to school and get my business degree. And all of a sudden, I was jobless. What do I do? And so I went and sat in a real estate office with my real estate degree, my real estate license, and answered phones and did my homework and built my business from there. And gosh, everyone in that office, if you're ever wanting to be a realtor, find a good office. We are competitors, but we are friendly competitors in this area, at least in Contra Costa County, where we help each other on some level. And especially if you can help them back. I'm very technical, and a lot of realtors are not. So I was able to help them technically, and then they answered my questions. So a lot of people helped mentor me. And then just through the years, I have a managing broker, I guess, who thinks differently than I do. I think outside of the box on this side, and he probably thinks outside of the box on that side. And he's a great person to just call up and say, okay, this is what's going on. This is what I think would solve the problem. Any ideas? And he'll come up with something completely different. And I love that. It's very helpful when you're trying to guide people, and you don't want to be stubborn about your thought process. You want to look at things differently because you want to help your clients in the best way you can.
Yeah, I forgot who told me this, but someone once told me that every business person should have 5 mentors, right? So you have a circle of 5 mentors, kind of like a board of director that you can go to and ask for advice. But preferably, one of those people is in your industry and the other 4 are not.
Yes,
because
agreed.
then you can go to the person that's in the industry. But you want people that can think outside of the box, that have more experience than you, that can really think way more at a higher level than you yourself, right? Because what happens is you elevate yourself to that higher level. And then at that point, you switch out your mentors and you keep moving up, right?
Right.
But you have one person in the industry and 4 people outside of the industry, because those other 4 people can give you a lot of insight into just business in general. Or they may see your own industry, like real estate, completely different from a consumer point of view, and they may be able to give you advice and tips on how to grow your business, marketing, and then you take that and apply it to your own business.
I love it.
I would agree with that. I think I've naturally found those mentors, but I kind of look at them as mentors in different areas of my life, which helps comprise the person who I am. You know, I have spiritual mentors. I have financial mentors. I have business mentors, and then I have a real estate mentor. So it helps round out my life so that everything encompasses. I don't put my whole life in a box. I am who I am. So
yeah. One of my best investor clients has taught me so much about real estate without even having a degree, and he just gave me a lot more tools to have in my toolbox as far as the way to look at things, you know, similar to what you were talking about earlier of seeing rent control, discounted properties as an opportunity.
Exactly.
Right. That's some genius stuff that as real estate agents we are not used to thinking in that direction. And so you do have to surround yourself with those people who do think that way, so then you can open up your mind and just create more opportunities for everyone.
Yeah. So I want to thank the 2 of you for coming onto the podcast. We talked a lot of really good stuff, very valuable information. Wish you the best in your business with the online auctions and the Airbnb idea is genius.
That was genius. Totally genius.
Move sellers into the Airbnb for a few months and then sell them
at a
that's
discount.
Just genius.
At a discount. So I have it on Airbnb for kind of a higher rate, and then they get the low rate because they're my client.
Yeah, and good luck with the rest of the year as president-elect, and you've got a
and the
much
next
bigger
year as president.
Yeah, you have a much bigger year next year too.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So, thank you for being on the podcast, and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lubman. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Google Play, SoundCloud, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. For more information on my business as a property manager and real estate team, go visit my website at marcguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.